I can't breathe. I wasn't reaching for it. You promised me you wouldn't kill me. I can't breathe. They're tasing me. I didn't even do nothing. I don't want to die young. I can't breathe. I don't have a gun. Stop shooting. Please don't let me die. What are you following me for? Why did you shoot me? Officers, why do you have your guns out? You shot me. You shot me. I love you too. Those were the last words. The last words of victims killed by violence. Violence at the hands of public servants who sworn to serve and protect. These victims died at the hands of law enforcement. And for the ones that didn't die at the hands of law enforcement, it was an unjust killing and their murderers were never convicted. On too many occasions, law enforcement feel like they are above the law. And essentially, they are. I stand in front of you today to explain to you that it was murder. So many victims gone. Not enough perpetrators behind bars. And this is an ongoing issue. Along with excessive force, unlawful traffic stops, and wrongful arrests. This is just a partial list of injustices that the people of color specifically endure at the hands of law enforcement. Let's stop letting money influence the justice system and instead enforce the laws that are in place and hold everyone accountable despite their race, their job, status, or class. Today, I will focus on 3 victims: Eric Gardner, Freddie Gray, and George Floyd. These are our I Can't Breathe victims. I chose them because choking and strangulation is such an inhumane and brutal way to die. On upenn.edu, an article from 2014 states that the combination of fear and an inability to effectively resist makes strangulation a powerful method of control. We all know, it's no secret, that racism still exists in this country. We know that despite of the abolishment of slavery and the civil rights movement, that inequality still exists. So being as though these victims was killed so personally and viciously shows a deeper hate than ones like to acknowledge. Not only can this be considered a hate crime, it was murder. According to the AmericanBar.org, when being charged with the crime, the investigation involves police officers, uniformed police officers, detectives, and the prosecutors. They all work together to develop a plan. To investigate so they can have enough evidence to charge. And that is what baffles me and confirms that the system is designed to cover up and ignore the wrongdoings of law enforcement. Because between all 3 of those positions, not one person stood up for what was right. Not one person recognized that it was murder. Someone needs to be held responsible for the crimes that are being committed. Because I know for one thing, it's for certain, if a civilian killed a cop, boy oh boy, it's a manhunt. I remember back in 2007, when I was 17 years old, a murderer was apprehended all the way in Florida for killing a cop here in Philadelphia. To top that off, I read on NBCPhiladelphia.com an article written by Danielle Johnson in 2009 that at the age of 23, that same cop killer will be sentenced to death by lethal injection. There is a zero tolerance for the killing of law enforcement, and rightfully so. But where's our protection? Where's that energy when a son is taken from his mother, or a child loses their parents, or a wife loses her husband, or a husband loses wife? It's a sad, vicious cycle of injustice that needs to be rectified before another life is lost senselessly at the hands of law enforcement. According to Wikipedia.com, accessed in 2020, Eric Garner was accused of selling cigarettes without a tax stamp, also known as in the inner city is known as selling Lucy's. So this man is accused of making $14 without being taxed by the government. Let's keep that in mind. After Gartner told the police he was tired of being harassed and that he was not selling cigarettes, the officers then attempted to arrest Eric. The cop, or in this case the murderer, then placed his arms around Eric's neck and threw him to the concrete. Eric repeated the words, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe," 11 times while laying face down on the sidewalk. Eric then lost consciousness. He laid on the sidewalk, not the back of the cop car, but on the sidewalk for 7 minutes waiting for EMT. Eric was pronounced dead at the hospital 1 hour later. Eric's death was ruled a homicide. Some of the details in the examiner's report is that his death was in the result of a chokehold. Now, what do you think would have happened if the murderer wasn't a cop? Or better yet, if the murderer was African American? That person would have been charged with first, maybe second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole or death by lethal injection. But what happens to the murderer if they're a cop? According to Wikipedia, accessed in 2020, Richmond County Grand Jury decided not to indict the murderer. But what I found odd, that there was a 5.9 settlement given to Eric's family. So my question is, if the city and taxpayers have to pay for this, why didn't the murderer have to serve any time for the crime? Well, if you count getting fired 5 years after the murder of punishment, I guess he was punished. Let's take Freddie Gray, for instance, a 25-year-old murdered at the hands of the police. According to Wikipedia, accessed in 2020, Freddie was arrested aggressively with excessive force and put into the back of a police van unsecured. There were witnesses and bystanders that stated the officers used excessive force. Subsequently, Freddie's death was due to a spinal cord injury. As a result, to being inside of a vehicle. Out of the 6 officers involved, 3 were tried. They were charged with manslaughter as well as second-degree murder, in which one was not found guilty, one was acquitted, and one was a mistrial. The remaining 3 officers, their charges were dropped. Again, this is a public-sized murder, and the cops still weren't held responsible. I mean, we can see this, and the cops still aren't held responsible. Which brings me to the most recent events with George Floyd. George Floyd had a knee put to his neck by an officer, in which it was held there for 8 minutes and 46 seconds until he died. This murder prompted a trail of events in which the entire country is under arrest. And what's scary is that we have a president in place that is absolutely not interested in the systematic racial injustice. Despite the muck that this country is running, he has still yet to ratify any laws pertaining to equality. Instead, he's waging war against the American citizens by bringing a U.S. military into our cities to watch over the businesses that were looted. In light of the death of George Floyd. So I end with this. The fact that these cases were publicized is what scares me. Under so much scrutiny, the system still doesn't deem these cases enough to prosecute. Now, George Floyd's murderers were charged. But we have to make sure he gets convicted. Cops believe they can treat people like they are above us and above the law, and this is not true. The Constitution holds laws in place to protect civilians. However, these laws are not enforced to all. These laws are limited and targeted to hold down the people of color while white America continue to rise. Is this ever going to stop? Is this ever going to end? We need to stop letting money silence us. We must continue to fight and protest until these laws are in place to protect the victims of police brutality. It starts with voting and being politically involved. In lieu of the recent events, I do feel like a change in the justice system is coming. Again, according to CNN, accessed in 2020, the police officer that held a knee to George Floyd's neck was charged with second-degree murder. Now, again, we have to hope that they get convicted. Stay tuned, stay woke, and stay aware. This is our era. Thank you.